3rd District, and was asked to make a couple introductory comments here to kick this event off. And want to make sure everyone is familiar with what this conference is. It's a series of events over the course of the weekend, starting with tonight's panel discussion. And Bobby Shearer, who is the coordinator for this, is going to be up here a little bit later to tell you a little bit more about that. There's more information about the conference on Humboldt State University's website, and that's humboldt.edu/biodiversity for this conference. There will be position statements for all of the panelists and other stakeholders that have provided information input for tonight's panel discussion. So I was asked to start this panel here with a brief overview of the Klamath Basin, its history, and the issues that have brought us to where we are today with 2 agreements, the Klamath Basin Restoration Act and the Klamath Hydropower Settlement Agreement, that have been signed by a number of parties that have been involved in these issues for a lot of years. And the state of legislation that was introduced last year didn't go anywhere, but now there's a process happening with a lot of the stakeholders being spearheaded by Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon to try to see if we can get to a little bit more consensus to move this project forward. So I have a PowerPoint presentation and I have a script. The two do not go together, so we'll see what happens here. I do want to give thanks to Jill Duffy, former supervisor from Humboldt County, who provided some of the material for the PowerPoint presentation. And also a number of the pictures that I used for it are just straight off the web, so if anyone here sees something that, your own pictures, thank you. Let's see here. I also want to take a minute just to give my thanks to Tim McKay. And folks that have worked on this issue for a lot of years are all, of course, familiar with Tim. Tim was really a powerful, passionate advocate for the Klamath River for many, many years until his untimely passing in 2006. And so much has happened on this issue since then. And I think he would have been really pleased to see how far this discussion has gone since he left us. So, Humboldt County, I should make clear too, Humboldt County is a signatory to both the Klamath Hydropower Settlement Agreement, the KHSA, and the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement, KBRA. And so while I'm here to try to provide just an overview, I am in the position of an advocate for these agreements, both as a county representative and personally believe that they're sound and a good path forward. So let's move on. Okay, the Klamath Basin itself spreads across 15,571 acres, or excuse me, square miles of southern Oregon and northern California. That's an area larger than 9 states of the United States. Virtually the entire basin drains through Humboldt County for the last 50 miles of its 254-mile run to the sea. And so whatever happens in the upper basin of the Klamath River has impacts for us here downstream and for our downstream communities. The mighty Klamath River has historically been the 3rd most productive salmon fishery in the U.S. outside of Alaska, surpassed only by the Columbia River in Oregon and the Sacramento-San Joaquin rivers in California. The river's location provides an important linkage, a midpoint linkage between these other river systems. This is a powerful economic engine that drove the coastal economies of Northern California and Southern Oregon for decades, blessing us with abundant salmon that supported our commercial, recreational, and tribal fisheries. Beginning in 1918, though, I'll back up because I want to slide ahead of myself here. Yeah, here are these beautiful dams. Beginning in 1918 and continuing through 1962, the Klamath Hydroelectric Project constructed a series of dams on the Klamath River, none of which included any provision for fish passage, thus effectively cutting off hundreds of miles of fall and spring Chinook and steelhead spawning habitat in the upper basin. In the reservoirs behind the dams, the cold, swift-running waters of the Klamath are brought to a standstill, allowing the water temperature to warm well above tolerable levels for cold water salmon. The still warm waters also serve to concentrate nutrients and to encourage the explosive growth of toxic blue-green algae blooms and other fish pathogens, which are now endemic to the Klamath Basin. These pathogens were implicated in the September 2002 fish kill, in which as many as 64,000 Chinook salmon were killed in the lower Klamath. This preventable disaster was the largest fish kill in the history of the Northwest. However, today, over 90% of the river salmon habitat has been destroyed or blocked by these aging and obsolete dams. More than 420 miles of historic stream habitat is now completely inaccessible to returning salmon. And over the past 60 years, once abundant Klamath Chinook salmon have declined sharply, from a historic average of nearly 900,000 to as few as 35,000 or less in some years. Coho salmon are listed as endangered under the ESA, Endangered Species Act, and other species such as the green sturgeon and Pacific lamprey are declining as well. That's the 2002 fish kill, a horrific event. Here's a better image of the basin that helps to clarify where the dams are. The 4 dams that are in question, there's other dams within the overall system, 2 more on the Klamath itself. But the lower 4 are the ones that are being discussed, and hopefully you can see those noted on the map up there. It also helps to clarify where the different stakeholders that you'll be hearing from tonight are within the basin. Here's some data on the fisheries. This I don't think I included the citation on it, but you can see that there's been a 98% loss for our coastal fisheries over the past decades. In the late 70s, commercial troll ocean fisheries in the Klamath Management Zone, which this chart represents, landed an average of over 3.6 million pounds of salmon. For the period from 2005 to 2009, that number had plummeted to an average of just 124,000 pounds, representing a decline of 92% for the Port of Brookings and 98% for the ports of Eureka and Crescent City. This precipitous decline has brought the shuttering of commercial processing facilities, the loss of onshore jobs, an ever-dwindling fishing fleet, and pain and suffering among the families in our fishing communities. Each fishing boat lost represents an independent, family-owned small business that's now gone. Coastal communities in Northern California and Southern Oregon have had to deal with the environmental and economic impacts of these dams for many decades. And yet these communities did not have the benefit of environmental impact studies, economic analysis, legislation, or Senate hearings before their natural wealth in the form of water was taken from them. The impact of the decline in Klamath salmon is felt far beyond the ports of Eureka, Crescent City, and Brookings. As previously stated, the river creates a bridge between populations from the Columbia and Sacramento-San Joaquin river systems. Additionally, the Klamath salmon intermingle in the ocean with these other salmon stocks from as far away as Monterey in central Washington, helping the viability of the entire West Coast salmon population. So the 4 dams that are being discussed here, Iron Gate, Copco, Copco 2, J.C. Boyle, you can see these were built out over the last 100 years, essentially, on the Klamath. And it's important to note that these dams are not a federal project. These dams are owned by Pacific Corp, a privately owned utility company. They're low-power hydroelectric dams that do not provide any irrigation water. They do not provide any flood control. They're neither large nor particularly powerful. Between them, they produce a combined annual average of just 78 megawatts, which is not a lot. By comparison, a single, more modern facility could be expected to generate 1,000 megawatts or more. So these are not important dams by any stretch. As noted previously, these dams were all built without any provision for fish passage, which would make them illegal by modern standards. The license to operate these dams expired in 2006, and as a part of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's, that's FERC, relicensing process, Pacific Corp would be required to retrofit all 4 dams with fish passage and make other upgrades at a cost of at least $350 million to them. Fish passage would also further limit the dam's energy production capacity, making them even less efficient than they are today. The cost of full dam removal as being proposed by these agreements is estimated to be $291 million, making it a far better proposition for PacifiCorp's ratepayers. PacifiCorp continues to operate these dams under a year-to-year license while they go through this process, pending congressional approval and implementation of the Klamath agreements. Under the agreements, PacifiCorp and its ratepayers would bear full responsibility of the cost of dam removal up to $200 million. Beyond that, the cost would be borne by California, the state of California, but the additional amount, as noted, $291 million, is far less than the amount that had been originally anticipated. And so the cost of to the state of California is quite a bit lower than the state was originally prepared to pay for dam removal. So there's a long history of conflict in this basin. As with many waterways, perhaps most or even all waterways in the western United States, water rights in the Klamath Basin have been oversubscribed. That means there are a lot more rights that exist on paper than there is water in the watershed. That means that not everyone that has a piece of paper saying they have water rights will actually be able to obtain the water that they believe they have. Their rights will be subjugated to those who have senior rights above them. And so in any given year, there's not enough water to meet the demands of all the users and still provide for the needs of the salmon and the downstream communities. This essential truth has led to many decades of fighting in the Klamath Basin, but all that conflict has failed to yield any more water for anybody. Klamath water conflicts have been the focus of regulatory proceedings and litigation in various venues without resolution. These conflicts intensified in the late 80s and early 2000s with listings of threatened and endangered fish species, abrupt water shutoffs to irrigators, blooms of toxic algae, water disease outbreaks, devastating fish kills, and commercial fish enclosures. In the midst of the 2001 drought, the Bureau of Reclamation terminated irrigation contracts to some 1,400 Upper Basin farmers to protect the endangered coho on the basis of biological opinions issued under the ESA. The farmers and their supporters staged street protests in Klamath Falls, Oregon, and some took control of the head gates of the project's canals. When local police refused to arrest them, federal agents had to patrol the canals to prevent further water seizures. A year later, as an over-response to those events, the Bush administration issued a controversial new biological opinion in which it determined that water diversions were not likely to adversely affect coho salmon for a below-average water year. The BLR subsequently reduced the amount of water it would release downriver by half, diverting the balance to farmers through the project's canals. And I think we all know the result. By September of 2002, the low flows, warm water temperatures, and exploding population of parasites from those beautiful green waterways behind the dams had killed as many as 64,000 fish in the lower Klamath. It was, again, the largest fish kill in the history of the Northwest. In response to these recurrent crises, the federal government has spent at least $181.4 million since 2001 on emergency drought relief and disaster assistance in this basin without any end goal in sight. That's $18 million a year to maintain an ongoing crisis situation without fixing anything. But the federal government did also start a process to begin looking at ways to address this problem. The Klamath Basin was cited as the poster child for the water wars in the West and for the kinds of conflicts that are being experienced all over the western United States. This outlines a number of the steps that led to the Klamath agreements. The opportunity was sparked by PacifiCorp having to begin the process of relicensing their dams with FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They had a 50-year license that was coming up in 2006, and they had to begin the process ahead of that time to work through it. During that process, the negotiations began to try to see if there was a way to reach a better outcome. It was following the disasters in 2001, 2002 that the Bush administration convened a cabinet-level working group to focus on the Klamath issues. In 2003, Interior Secretary Gail Norton, as noted, highlighted the basin as the poster child for water conflicts. Informal meetings and conferences were convened between tribal leaders, irrigators, conservationists, commercial fishermen, elected officials, and concerned residents throughout the basin, with the support of the Department of the Interior, the Bureau of Reclamation, NOAA, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and other parties and agencies. In 2004, Oregon Governor Ted Kulongoski and California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, along with Klamath stakeholders, began a 5-year process of negotiation that resulted in the Klamath Agreements. So it's a cooperative approach to managing the basin's resources and trying to permanently fix the unresolved problems in this basin. Humboldt County, along with other local governments, state and federal agencies, tribes, irrigators, fishermen, conservation groups, and a private utility, was among the nearly 30 parties that actively participated in the negotiation process leading to the development of the agreements. And I think we've got here's a long list of folks that were involved in the agreements, not all of whom became signatories to the final, but there were a lot of folks at the table through that process. The benefits of these Klamath agreements, well, as I said, the speech and the PowerPoint don't necessarily go together. But the goal, again, is to develop strategies for long-term solutions rather than a year-to-year constant struggle within the basin, to keep the basin communities whole, to not have a solution that works to solve the problems for one part of the basin at the expense of the other, and to restore the Klamath Basin watershed. It's a quote from Greg Addington, Executive Director of Klamath Water Users Association, and Leif Hillman, Vice Chairman of the Karuk tribe. The Klamath Basin has become famous for conflict. Tribes, irrigators, environmentalists, and others have had victories and losses in the ongoing legal and administrative battles, yet no one is better off. We think there is a better way. We're committed to resolve our differences in a constructive way to our mutual benefit, and we're talking. So there's been discussion about the advantages of the Klamath process, the negotiation process, versus just dropping the negotiations and going back to the FERC relicensing process. The FERC process is very limited in what it can do. The FERC process has already provided a recommendation for fish passage rather than dam removal, which would not result in taking out the dams. It would improve the flow regimes, and it would provide improved fish populations, but it would not, under the current recommendation from that process, would not result in dam removal, would not improve certainty for the upper basin folks, would not result in broader overall fish restoration through the watershed, would not deal with the power cost solutions and the issues for the ratepayers, and would not address a number of the other issues that are all on the table through this negotiation process. There we go. So this chart helps to lay out some of the benefits that come from this process. For the first time ever, the wildlife refuges in the upper basin would receive assurances of water commitments. There'd be increased water storage and availability for the upper basin. Agricultural production would get benefit primarily during drought years. By having assurances, they would trade off the benefits of in years of abundance for assurances in years when there's less water to go around. Jobs, regional jobs, the dam removal itself is estimated to produce 1,400 jobs within the year that process would be undertaken, all in the midsection of the river. 4,600 jobs over the course of the years for KBR implementation, estimated 453 additional commercial fishing jobs from improvements in fisheries, and anywhere from 70 to 695 additional agricultural jobs during drought years. The agreements protect tribal trust resources and improve social, economic, cultural, and health problems for 6 federally recognized Klamath Basin tribes. Of course, I will leave it to the tribes who are here to discuss those issues. Sorry, I can't see that one from here. By increasing access to historical habitat and improving biological, chemical, and physical water quality would help to improve the conditions for fish. Again, this opens up 420 miles of habitat which has not been available to fish for decades. Dam removal and KBR implementation would improve fish populations by increasing access to historical habitat, as noted, improving biological and physical factors. And for the commercial and tribal fisheries, removal of the dams, as noted, will create a greater abundance of salmon. Annual Chinook salmon will increase by 81%. Ocean, commercial, and sports harvest by 46%, and other benefits, as you can see there. So a wide variety of benefits that can be achieved through negotiation, by negotiating things that would not be on the table through the FERC process alone. So this past June 20th, the Klamath issue, these agreements, finally made it to Washington, D.C. For hearings before the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. These hearings were called by Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon, who has been a powerful voice on this, has taken up that issue and now has been working on a series of meetings with stakeholders throughout the basin to try to figure out if there's any additional room to move towards greater consensus on these agreements. And as you can see from the folks who are here, the folks that, hey, there I am. The folks that were at this meeting represent a broad variety of local governments, of tribes, of stakeholders in the upper basin, of fishing interests and conservation interests. There's a very broad group of folks that were brought together for these hearings. And I'm very pleased that Senator Wyden has continued moving those issues forward. I'm hoping we might even have a little bit of an update on that here today. So I want to finish by talking about the debate on the Klamath dams, because it's clear to me that we have very different discussions that are happening on this issue depending on where you are. And we've all seen this bumper sticker, "Undam the Klamath." And I don't think there's anyone in this room who's going to argue anything else. I don't think there's anyone here who doesn't believe we should undam the Klamath. But that's not the debate that's happening anywhere else outside of our little echo chamber here on the coast. This is a debate that we're seeing other places. Places where, the signs don't say undam the Klamath, they say save our dams. Stop the Klamath dam scams. And these people are very whipped up about this. People are opposing dam removal strongly. And so when we have a debate over the best path to removing those dams, we can talk about it all we want, and it's important that we talk about it. And it's important that we be upfront about the shortcomings of these agreements, because they are not perfect. But we need to recognize that no one else is having that discussion. Everyone else is fighting dam removal. A couple of years ago, I was over in Wairika when the Siskiyou County Board of Supervisors voted not to sign the KBRA and KHSA, and they had a large enough crowd they had to hold their board meeting in a theater much like this one, which was pretty full. I believe this is a hearing I was at for the I don't think maybe this isn't it, but yeah, in Wairika, where they ended up having to move it from the conference center it was at to the fairgrounds to hold the massive crowd of people that was there, all of whom were opposed to dam removal. Again, very, very clear what the debate is outside of our little corner of the basin. People that are opposed to dam removal, that see it as a threat to their way of life, a threat to their economy. I wish I could remember what that one says over there. Oh, rural cleansing, that's right. Rural cleansing is a term. And this is another term that I heard first time in Wairika at one of these hearings, Agenda 21, stop dam removal. That hearing that they showed before heard Obama's name so often that you would have thought he single-handedly wrote the legislation. So it is a very passionate and powerful discussion that is not about what is the best way to remove these dams. It is about stopping dam removal at all cost. And it gets ugly. On the other side, we do have folks that have been, arguing that the KBRA will provide jobs, which is what the reports say, which is what the data definitely shows, that this will be good not just for the fish, not just for the communities downstream, but for the entire basin by providing jobs. But those voices are being drowned out by this greater and louder debate against dam removal at all. So I would hope that as we have this discussion here tonight, that we can focus on that agreement, that we all agree on undamming the Klamath, that it needs to happen to benefit the fish. And we need to recognize that our disagreements here, while valid and important to work through them and to be aware of differing opinions by well-qualified experts who have different opinions on the data before them, we do all agree here on the coast that taking out these dams is necessary and important, and we should be united in that task rather than dividing ourselves. Thank you. So I've been asked to now introduce Bobby Shearer, who I mentioned before. He's the president of the Humboldt State University chapter of the Society for Conservation Biology and the creator of the Biodiversity Conference here at HSU. Again, as noted, following the conference, if you want to get more information from any of the panelists here, there will be more info on humboldt.edu/biodiversity. So, Bobby? There it is.
Wow. Thank you guys for all joining us this evening, coming out to the Klamath Basin Forum and HSU's Biodiversity Conference. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction, and thank you to our panelists for joining us this evening. I'd like to begin by providing some background on the inspiration for this event, as well as highlighting tonight's objective. We've all heard about the Klamath Basin water issues, including dam removal and the water rights controversies in the news over the last few years. However, these issues have been escalating over the last few decades, and there's an immense amount of information for public to sort through in order to try and get a glimpse into the complexities of the positions held by a large number of stakeholder groups. For the public that wants to learn more about what's going on, most don't have the time to do the detective work required to sift through endless pages of facts and opinions and perspectives and legal documents and environmental assessments and more. So last year I decided to invite one of the names I was commonly seeing quoted in newspapers to speak at the Biodiversity Conference and provide some insight for the audience. Amongst many other things, I learned that there are more perspectives on these issues than any one stakeholder group can represent. Now, this year's event aims to capture a wider range of the positions of Klamath Basin stakeholder groups by representing more parties in person, as well as more position statements that are posted online. It's humboldt.edu/biodiversity/Klamath, actually. We continue to invite stakeholder groups to submit their statements. They can email them to the HSU Society for Conservation Biology at scb_hsu@humboldt.edu. So the objective of this event is to provide a well-rounded breadth of information surrounding Klamath water issues for the public so that constructive and informed conversations can take place on a broader scale as we move forward. A well-informed public is a powerful force in making positive social change, and a public that better understands the impacts of such a highly politicized land management decision might have on ecosystems and cultures is better postured to advocate for their values. So with tonight's Klamath Basin Forum, we hope to see the great amount of information available synthesized into some key points that can highlight the issues so the public can find a starting point to further investigate these matters and involve themselves in further dialogue. To this end, online position statements are limited to 800 words, and the groups who chose to provide supplemental material, which is available upon your entrance, was limited to 2 pages so as to not overwhelm us with this information. So the format for the event tonight is as follows. After this introduction, each panelist will give us 5-minute synopsis on their respective group's history with the Klamath Basin water issues, their current positions, and their hopes for the future. This will be followed by a series of pre-designed questions that we sent to the panelists a couple days ago. Their responses will be time restricted as dictated by front row card cues. Finally, we'll open the floor to some audience inquiries for the last 30 minutes or so. Throughout all of this, the panelists might refer to their supplemental material if they so chose to provide it. Strict protocol and rules of engagement have been developed, and we really expect everybody to adhere to them, both on this panel and in the audience. These are very contentious issues, and many people are emotionally invested in their values and their corresponding positions. However, tonight's objective is to remain in the forefront of our minds. We're here to provide information for the public regarding various views held by some stakeholder groups involved in these issues, and we will maintain a positive environment, and any violation of the rules of engagement will not be tolerated. So for the panelists, you can stay hard on the issues, but stay soft on the people. Keep your discussion friendly and issue-based. Direct your answers to the audience only, not to one another. Maintain fairness by respecting the time cues. Each question will begin with a different panelist, as directed by me. To the audience, please do your part to maintain the positive learning environment by refraining from any kinds of outbursts or antagonistic comments, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with the views being expressed. Behavior that is not conducive to a learning environment will not be tolerated. This is about educating ourselves. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Starting from the end is Craig Tucker from the Karuk tribe, Don Gentry from the Klamath tribes, Glen Spain, representing the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations, Mike Orcutt from the Hoopa tribe, and Felice from North Group Redwood chapter of Sierra Club. So with that, we'll get into the questions.
Did you want us to make a statement? Because
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not following my own agenda, guys.
Felice,
Good thing you guys are paying attention.
Felice, if you and I can agree, I think I'd like to defer to the tribes. They were here first, after all.
Okay. That's where it starts.
Okay?
Good evening. I'd like to thank the organizers of the event for inviting the tribe to offer their perspective this evening. And just a quick introduction, my name is Mike Orcutt. I'm the director of the Fisheries Department for the Hoopa Valley Tribe. I'm also an enrolled member of the Hoopa tribe, but I'm also a descendant of 2 of the other tribes as well, the Yurok and Karuk. And I've been pretty much involved. I went to school here, graduated quite a number of years ago, but I've been involved in fishery restoration and fisheries and water issues for a long time. I've had some colleagues in the audience here, debates and different things over the years on fish allocation, on water restoration issues, a whole bunch of different things. Through the course of my career, I've been involved in a number of committees, the Pacific Fishery Management Council, actually one of the original Klamath Task Force members that began in 1986 and ended in 2006. And this evening, what I wanted to start with is, one is I do have a written statement. There's 100 copies that I placed out there. I've also placed it on the website, so it may be more than 800 words, but it's there. And I was kind of going to, anyway, what I wanted to start with is the Hoopa tribe has been involved for many, many years in restoration through the 80s, the fish wars in the 70s, through the early 80s, and we've always been a constructive participant in all the discussions. today, what I wanted to kind of emphasize where we're coming from. Obviously, protection of our culture and our standing in the Rit Basin. Our ceremonial grounds have been there over 7,500 years. We've been very fortunate to be in that part of the river, the Trinity River Basin and the Hoopa Valley Reservation. We also know that science is what drives decision in modern days. We also know there are other tools. We've been involved in Congress. We've been involved in court. We are in 2 lawsuits presently today as we speak. And one of the major concerns that we came out of that perspective is that really one of the really overarching things that we're up against is Western water and development. And what that simply means is the demand for water, whether it's in the Central Valley, whether it's in the Columbia Basin, whether it's in the Klamath Basin. There are different parties and factions that are looking to, just in some instances, to exploit that water, and that's the foundation of our culture. And so I just wanted to kind of put a perspective out there that obviously tonight the forum is biodiversity and dam removal. We know that I think the presentation in 1917, the Klamath tribes, for example, haven't had, over 100 years, haven't had fish up to their reservation. We have a dam on the Trinity River in 1964, a major impoundment. Over half of our water is still diverted into the Central Valley. And what that means, though, is the natural course of what was out there. You know, in our case, 100 miles of habitat above a dam is no longer there. And those dams, in putting it in placement and diversion of water, has had major impact on our fishery. And we seek to change that. I just wanted to give one example as in terms of the degraded habitat on our reservation, the filling of the holes on our reservation and the impact on fishing sites. Every 2 years we have a major ceremony there, the boat dance. We just had one this year, and we have to call up the Bureau of Reclamation because the river is so degraded. Well, I better get to the punchline then. The punchline for us is that the presentation that was given, I think that was a part of the secretarial determination process. And we have been a participant in the widened discussions, and that is very focused on 3 issues: affordable power for the upper basin, getting another 30,000 acre feet in the upper Klamath Basin, and reducing restoration costs. And I would like to emphasize that last point because it's a major part of the KBRA and KHS agreements, funding, and the assurances that go along with that. The allocation of water that's tied to that, please read my statement, and thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. And I'll hopefully come out more any questions. Thank you.
Felice. My name is Don Gentry. I'm chairman of the Klamath tribes. My Klamath name is Ditchigyunk, which means having done good things or lives good. That name was given to me at our Return of Twam ceremony, which is a ceremony that we reinstituted in 1990 at the urging of our elders, saying that we have the Twam is the Lost River sucker, important fishery to our people for centuries. One of the reasons that we're still here, and also the Kaptu, which is the short-nosed sucker, endangered. Our elders said, it's fine to have the biologists and the attorneys and folks doing what they're doing to restore our fisheries, but we need to do first things first. We need to honor our ceremonies and do what Creator told us to do. And that ceremony, the Return of Twam ceremony, was a time when we got together as a people before we caught our fish, and we prayed and we thanked Creator. We prayed for the people to the north, south, east, and west of us. our people gathered together. The Klamath people are not only just the Klamath or the Usukni Mucklucks, the people of the lake. We're also the Modakni, the Nunu, which is a Paiute word just meaning the people. So we're 3 people groups in the Upper Klamath Basin, located at the headwaters of the Klamath. I can take you right to where the headwaters of the Williamson River is, which is tributary to Klamath Lake. We're blessed that these rivers and streams just flow right out of the ground in our homeland here. Pure water that comes out of the ground about 42 degrees. So despite all the significant changes that have occurred in our upper basin, we still have these areas of refugia, an opportunity to restore the fisheries that have been lost to us and to the public. The fisheries issues and all the other aquatic resources are so important to us because that's who we are. When we learn our language and learn our history and learn our culture, it's just evident to see our values, our traditions, and cultures as so linked to those things, the things that Creator placed there for us. Our legends and stories tell us the Creator placed us there, and He placed us there for plans and purposes, I think, that are even evident today. And so restoring all the aquatic resources and the health of the upper basin and the whole Klamath system is so important and key to our people. So with that, we know that we're talking about more than just a quantity of water. We're in state water adjudication up in Oregon, where there's this process to determine, legal process to determine who gets water and who's first in line to get water and how much is that water. So, and that was the context of the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreements and the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreements, was in the context of that water adjudication. The parties to the agreements in the upper basin, especially those battling over the amount of water that they were to receive for their purposes, felt it was in their best interest to get together and sit around a table to try to come up with a solution that would work for all, that provides some sustainability and viability. And for the Klamath tribes, we need to make sure that there's enough water in the system to restore our aquatic resources. But we know it's more than just an amount of water. There have been significant changes that I hope you'll come to understand that have occurred in the upper basin that affect our fisheries. And because the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement was designed to address those changes, sustainability of the tribal treaty resources or restoration of those resources, and sustainability of the others in the basin, that's why the Klamath tribes have supported that. We believe it's the most viable option. Rather than battling over just an amount of water, we need to, as much as possible, get what we're calling critical mass in support of restoring the system that's so degraded. And that's why we support the agreements. So I thank you for this opportunity to be here and to share our views and our perspectives, and hope you have a better understanding of the upper basin. I'm the only representative here tonight from the area there, but be willing to answer any questions and provide information as I can. Thank you so much.
Hey, good evening. My name is Craig Tucker, and I'm the Klamath coordinator for the Karuk tribe. The Karuk are the tribe that are upstream of the Yurok, are out here with us tonight. We're downstream of the Klamath tribes. We're downstream of the dams. And I'm not a tribal member, but I've been working for the tribe for about 8 years on this issue. And when I was brought in to work on this issue, it was pretty clear to tribal leadership that the river was a mess, and the reasons for why it were a mess were pretty well understood too. And the primary reasons were, one, this complex of dams that degraded water quality and blocked salmon migration, and two, the management of water from the upper, the Bureau of Reclamation's irrigation project far above the dam. So I think as we go through the conversation, it's important to understand that the issues of flows on the Klamath are really separate from the issue of these particular dams we want to remove. The dams we want to remove really don't control flows in the Klamath River. The flows in the Klamath River are really controlled by the operation of the Bureau of Reclamation Irrigation Project. And when I was brought on board, my tribal council, my bosses were like, we need a campaign. We need to find a way to get after the folks that owns these dams and bring a lot of grassroots support to dam removal. And back then, we weren't having forums where we were arguing about how best to remove the dams. It was like people were whispering behind closed doors that, fantasizing that maybe we could pull off this dam removal, because this would arguably be the biggest dam removal in the world outside of wartime, as far as I know. So when we started, about 30 or 35 of us, some of the folks here at the table, some folks out here in this audience, we went to Scotland, because the folks that owned the dams was a Scottish multinational energy company called Scottish Power, and we crashed their shareholders meeting. And it was a huge deal. I mean, it generated international headlines, and we did that 3 years in a row. And just when we thought we might win this fight, at this company's shareholders meetings, they sold the company. And they sold the company to a subsidiary of Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. So for the next 3 years, we were traveling out to Omaha, and we were disrupting Warren Buffett's Woodstock of capitalism to bring attention to these dams. And at the same time we're doing this, we're suing them. We're building a scientific record that clearly justified what we wanted, which was dam removal. And at the same time, we were trying to solve this other problem, which is the problem of flows in the Klamath River. But we took a different strategy to solve that problem. We took the strategy of actually sitting down with the irrigators on the Klamath Irrigation Project, because we really, for years, had litigated back and forth with the irrigators, and it had been sort of a zero-sum game where no one was really getting ahead but the attorneys that were getting paid. So about the time that Pacificor started to cave to a lot of the pressure that was being put on them, we started sort of dovetailing the two strategies. And that's when we ended up with two agreements. We have a KHSA, which is really focused on the part of a dam removal in Pacificor, and then we have this KBRA, which is really focused on dealing with the flows and the restoration agreement with the irrigators. And so those sort of dovetailed, and we signed both agreements together in February of 2010. And I do say, we sort of got down to the end of this process, and it was time to sign the dotted lines, and we worked out these very difficult agreements, is when a lot of folks who had been allies for years started having some disagreements amongst one another. And that's why, tonight, I think everybody here tonight represented on this panel is diehard supporter of salmon restoration, a diehard supporter of removing the dams in the Klamath River, but there's some diversity of opinion of how we get there, and are these agreements the way to do that? For the Karuk tribe, we do think they're the way to do it, and I think you guys can see what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now, and I just challenge you that, any agreement or any strategy to pull off the biggest dam removal in U.S. history and to restore a watershed that's 15,000 square miles is going to require congressional help. We're going to have an act of Congress. And that means we've got to spend some time talking to guys on the other side of the aisle, and we have to be willing to provide some incentives and benefits to those folks as well. Thanks.
Good evening, and thank you for being here. Thank you also to Supervisor Lovelace for setting the table here with a good backgrounder. My name is Glen Spain. I'm the Northwest Regional Director for the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations, PCFFA. And we're a trade association for commercial fishing families, mom and pop, mostly boat owner family operations that deliver salmon and other seafood to America's tables. We are downstream of even the downstream. Why are we here at this sort of situation? How is it that this affects us? That's because the salmon, when they hit the ocean, go both north and south for a very, very long distance in both directions. They intermingle with our fisheries. They become part of our fisheries. They become then part of the livelihoods of our folks, who are also people of the fish, like the tribes. and part of our culture and what pays the bills and what pays the mortgage, all the way down to Monterey and all the way up to Central Washington. When we had our fisheries closure in 2006, that was directly related to the collapse of the Klamath. The Klamath is right in the middle of the coast. So it is the weakest link, and under the principle of weak stock management, that weakest link is what determines the fishery everywhere, regardless of how many fish there are from other abundant runs. In 2006, we suffered an enormous loss, and that was on the heels of the 2002 fish kill in the river. That was on the heels of the 2001 shutdown in the upper basin. Commercial fishermen are not very different than farmers. We tend to be blue-collar folks. We tend to be work-oriented folks. We're family food providers. We harvest from the ocean. Farmers harvest from the land. There's a lot of similarities between the two cultures. And after years of litigation, after years of struggle between one segment and another, we looked around, all of us in the basin, and said, everybody's suffering. The reality is all the congressmen in the world, all the lawyers in the world, all the activists in the world cannot make more rain. We have to learn to live with what we've got. The linking of that issue, for us, it's salmon restoration. That's the primary drive. And I've personally been involved with PCFFA working on Klamath restoration issues since the mid-'80s. And our president, Dave Bitts, is here in the third row, and he's been a fisherman in this region for longer than that. Commercial fishermen go back generations. And we depend on this resource. We're intimately tied to this resource. If it isn't sustainable, we're the folks who suffer. We started looking around and looking at all the litigation and looking at all the folks. We were actually, in 2001, we were ordered to work together, try to mediate a solution. Federal Judge Conf basically says, you know, you do it now or you do it later, but you'll be doing this somewhere along the line. So we looked at the history of one crisis after another, and we thought maybe we could do something better. So we started talking to people. One good principle, or a good quote to remember, is the Israeli General Moshe Dayan. I like to quote a lot. He says, if you want to make peace, you have to talk to your enemies, not your friends. You have to talk to people you may not like very much. You may not be on the same issue, but you have to find common ground. And we started working to do that. That led to a series of negotiations. We also were involved in the FERC relicensing process, which started in the year 2000, where Pacific Corp was looking toward applying for a new license. These things started to merge around 2005. The reality is, if your goal is salmon restoration, it's not enough to take the dams down. That's a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. You have to reallocate the water more fairly in the basin to live within what the rainfall provides. You also have to undo about 150 years of damage that's been done to our salmon river and our watersheds. And the important thing is that the Klamath is one of those places in the world where the pieces are all still there. It can be restored. It's not like a lot of rivers in urbanized areas. It's a rural area, real people who depend on it, and the agreements to restore that are in front of us today. We were negotiators in that process. I was personally there at every meeting, every time, and we support that effort to go together as a unit in the basin together.
I'm Felice Pace. I'm representing the North Group of the Redwood chapter of the Sierra Club. We have a handout out there. I made the copies myself. I didn't have time to send it in, but it is a letter to Senator Wyden from the American Bird Conservatory, the Audubon Society of Corvallis, Audubon Society of Portland, Environmental Protection Information Center, Klamath-Siskiyou Wildlands Center, Oregon Wild, Salem Audubon Society, Sierra Club, and Water Watch. Oregon Wild and Water Watch were kicked out of the negotiations. You can't make peace when you kick people out of negotiations. I moved to the Scott River Valley, one of the major tributaries, in 1976. 1986, we had the Klamath Act, 20-year restoration program to restore our fisheries. It failed. It failed because the funding was decided, and I was part of that failure. Many of those, some of you in the room as well, because we made decisions politically, not based on science. We face that same problem with these deals. These are political deals. They're practicing political science, and real science has been pushed into the background and is not being paid attention to. I've worked for the Karuk tribe. I was their first social service director, working with Chris Peters. I helped get them started when they were federally recognized. I've directed social services for the Yurok tribe. I've worked with the Hoopa for many years. 15 years I ran the Klamath Forest Alliance that was in the negotiations. The negotiations split our group. We couldn't agree on it. We didn't sign it. We don't oppose it. That particular group. One of the things I helped organize, along with Glen, Mike Orcutt, and others, was the Klamath Basin Coalition. We had a strong coalition of tribes, environmental groups, and fishermen. These deals have fractured that and created disunity. Disunity means we don't have the power to restore this river. And what we need to restore in order to restore this river is our unity among those who care about the river and the fish. Everyone is sincere here. Everyone thinks that what they're supporting is in the best interest of the river and their group and the salmon. But there are some fatal flaws in these deals. There's many good things in them. One of the fatal flaws in the KHSA, just to give you an idea, is liability. PacifiCorp is removed from all liability, including liability for toxic legacies, unassessed toxic legacies that are lurking around those powerhouses, up to 100-year-old powerhouses. It's tied to the governor's water bond. You can go listen to Tom Stokely tomorrow talk about that. The KBRA is very complex, has many good things as well, but it also has fatal flaws because it favors the federal irrigators over the private irrigators. Any deal which favors some tribal interests over other tribal interests, some environmental interests over other environmental interests, some agricultural interests over others, cannot provide a durable and sustainable solution. We need to get back to unity of those who care about the river. Thank you.